A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, a single window on the left wall letting in soft daylight. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls and a natural wooden floor. A single window lets in soft day. The room remains still, a study in quiet minimalism. The sun, however, continues its slow, inevitable journey across the floorboards. The daylight enters from the left, illuminating the precise center. The shadow cast by the oak chair begins to soften. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, and a single window on the left. The room remains steady. The light from the window subtly increases across the wooden floor, illuminating the chair in the center. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, a single window on the left wall letting in soft daylight, and one light oak wooden chair. The rectangular room remains still, yet the highlight on the light oak chair subtly shifts. The change is immediate. The environment feels stable and continuous. The shadow along the back wall becomes slightly more defined as the day progresses. This room remains largely unchanged, save for the brief fluctuation in the ambient daylight entering from the window on the left. The room remains still as the brightness on the floor equalizes again. The timing appears consistent with expectation. In this empty space, the only movement is the light from the window. It slowly traces the grain of the wooden floor and the legs of the chair. The shadow slowly contracts, marking the passage of time. The environment continues to feel entirely predictable. A rectangular room, matte white walls, and a natural wooden floor. A single oak chair sits precise. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls and a natural wooden floor. A single window lets in soft daylight. Scene 16. The light oak chair sits precisely in the middle of the natural wooden floor. Note the subtle shift in the highlight. The scene remains unchanged, a single light oak chair precisely at the center. The light reflection on the floor subtly softens, maintaining a natural timing. In this precisely measured space, the only movement is the gradual encroachment of the shadow, marking the sun's slow arc. The chair remains precisely at the center, a solitary object in a quiet space. The light from the window continues its slow, steady increase. The room, with its matte white walls and natural wooden floor, remains coherent. The single oak chair is motionless. The change feels expected. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, a single window on the left wall letting in soft daylight. And Scene 23. The static, eye-level view shows a minimalist room. A single light oak chair is positioned. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, a single window on the left, and one light oak wooden chair at the center. Scene 25. The camera is static. The room remains completely stable as the light and shadow appear balanced. Nothing in the scene suggests any delay yet. The room feels almost identical, yet the sunlight appears slightly more aligned than expected. The angle corrected itself without visible cause. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, a single window on the left wall letting in soft day. The scene shows no movement, but the brightness gradient on the floor shifts earlier than expected. The timing feels slightly misaligned. The reflection on the chair's surface appears to lag behind the actual light position. The delay is subtle but noticeable. The room remains unchanged. The wall illumination completes its transition slightly after the floor adjusts. The sequence feels reversed by a fraction. The light source is soft, yet the shadow achieves a sharpness that should be impossible under these conditions. It fades. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, a single window on the left wall letting in soft daylight. The floor brightness seems to stabilize before the window brightness completes its transition. The order feels slightly inverted. The light reflection on the chair appears to shift a moment after the floor has already changed. The delay feels measurable, yet quiet. A rectangular indoor room with a single window letting in soft daylight, and one light oak wooden chair placed at the center. The walls are currently correcting their brightness. The floor had already reached equilibrium earlier. The synchronization feels slightly off. In this static environment, the light moves across the floor, yet the reflection on the oak chair seems delayed, however slightly. The brightness gradient across the floor appears to complete itself in reverse order. The pattern feels slightly incorrect. The camera remains static. A rectangular indoor room. The static camera remains steady as the window light stabilizes before the shadows finish adjusting. The sequence feels out of order. The view remains static on the light oak chair centered in the room. The brightness arrives in uneven steps, causing a fragmented rather than continuous change. The chair's position is unchanged, but its shadow suggests a slightly different light origin. The contradiction is subtle, yet undeniable. Scene 42. The timing feels slightly residual as the light on the wall completes its adjustment in a delayed echo. Everything else had settled, but the floor brightness was consistently late, slowly adjusting to the soft daylight from the window on the left. A minimalist room with a single light oak chair. The shadow under the chair briefly shifts even though the light has stabilized. The lag persists. The room remains unchanged. The illumination across the entire room appears to finalize in staggered steps. The single light oak chair remains centered. The soft daylight from the window gently intensifies. Its movement brief. The correction feels like a catch-up. A rectangular indoor room, viewed from a static eye-level camera, shows no movement as the brightness distribution appears to finalize.
The delay feels structural.
A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, a single window on the left wall letting in soft daylight. The light appears to complete its shift twice, a repeated correction of the same moment. The timing feels slightly doubled. In this static view of the room, the shadow beneath the central chair sharpens unnaturally before the ambient light settled. The order of completion feels inconsistent. The eye-level view shows no movement, yet the reflection on the chair appears slightly ahead of the actual light change, an effect that feels anticipatory rather than reactive. The delay pattern becomes more noticeable. The correction feels out of sequence. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, a single window on the left wall letting in soft daylight. A light oak chair sits at the center. The floor illumination seems to arrive in a slightly broken sequence of micro-adjustment. The delay feels increasingly structural. The environment is static. Observe the subtle shift in illumination from the window on the left.
The lag feels layered.
The light gradient across the floor appears to shift backward before returning to its previous state. The correction feels temporally unstable. The chair sits precisely at the center. The ambient light is stable, yet the shadow beneath it fades entirely before returning. Remains unchanged as the brightness across all surfaces appears to settle, but only after an earlier version of stability has already been observed. The layering of completion feels confusing. Please. The scene is defined by its stillness. Only the light arriving from the window on the left seems to hesitate. This is scene 66. A minimalist rectangular room with a single chair at the center. Shows no motion as the shadow alignment appears to correct itself after multiple prior corrections have already completed. The redundancy becomes noticeable. The room remains steady as the light intensity briefly steps forward in time. It then returns precisely to its original. The illumination stabilizes after a brief delay. This stabilization process repeats itself twice more, persistently. The environment has already reached equilibrium multiple times. The chair's highlight shifts afterward, and the lag becomes cumulative. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, and one light oak wooden chair. As the light completes its second adjustment, the shadow exhibits an echo-like response, persisting briefly before settling. The room appears fully stable, yet the timing of stability feels slightly delayed compared to what was already observed as stable moments. The contradiction deepens. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, a single window on the left wall letting in soft. The entire room feels synchronized again, but only after several earlier versions have been replaced. The present moment feels slightly behind itself. instance. The light is shifting in a way that does not correspond to any visible cause, as if the room is reacting to time slightly ancient. The chair remains centered, yet the perception begins to split. An echo of its form lingers. The brightness of the floor creates a curious mismatch. It feels like an earlier iteration of the room, blurring the line between sight and certainty.
The present feels misregistered.
The observer becomes aware of their own presence as a delayed thought, as if awareness is arriving after perception has already moved forward. There is a soft delay between the visual input and the sense of now. A subtle gap between seeing. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, and a single window letting in soft daylight. The subject, a light oak chair, is positioned precisely at the center. Observation over time reveals a perceived shift. We observe the room from this fixed position. The light oak chair remains centered. Despite the central chair is bathed in soft daylight, but the shadows it casts are sharp, heavier than they should. A brief detachment from the current moment. It was as if the room was being observed a fraction after it had already occurred. The scene is static, yet the shadow under the chair seems disconnected from the present moment, reflecting an earlier state of light rather than the current soft glow. Their perception is trailing behind the actual visual state by an unmeasurable fraction. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls, a natural wooden floor, a single window on the left wall letting in soft daylight. The timing of the light feels partially remembered rather than currently observed, as if the present is being reconstructed from a delayed awareness. The room is perfectly static. However, the chair at the center appears anchored in space but not in time. A rectangular indoor room with matte white walls and a natural wooden floor. A single window lets in soft daylight. The concept of now feels like it is being reconstructed continuously, rather than experienced in real time. It is the same room, the same chair. Only the light has changed, softening the edges of the present moment. Perception and time feel partially separated, as if sight continues forward while awareness follows behind. Remains still as the observer recognizes the room as familiar but cannot determine when the familiarity was first established. The room remains unchanged, yet the perception of continuity is unstable. The shadows shift backwards, then Scene 98. A study of a minimalist space, centered by an oak chair. Note the subtle remains unchanged, as the observer senses that perception is now following the room, rather than witnessing it in real time. The entire experience feels like it has already happened once before this exact observation, leaving the present moment slightly behind itself.